Captains, you know you want to see more videos like these. How about more on-site coverage of special events and visits to Cryptic Studios? Then visit patreon.com/Priority1 and find out how you can be a monthly supporter of the show. Because without your ongoing support, none of this would be possible.
Command codes verified.
Captains, our next interview here at Cryptic Studios is with the art team, character artists, and of course the lead artist, Brad Stokan. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon and talking with us on a busy schedule leading up to Delta Rising. I know that you've all been very, very busy, so thank you very much.
Yep, you're welcome.
Why don't we go ahead and go around the table and please introduce yourselves to our audience. Maybe talk a little bit about a day in the life of what you do, and why don't we start with you, Brad? We just saw each other about a month and a half or so ago, right?
Yeah, good to see you guys again.
Good to see you again.
My name's Brad Stokan. I'm the art director on Star Trek Online here at Cryptic Studios. It's my pleasure to work with these fine gentlemen, our character art team, and together we sort of work to define the look and feel for new critter groups, and the main challenge, and it's an enjoyable challenge, is to take inspiration from the reference we can gather from the show and either extrapolate that into a full group, a full critter group as we say, or a full group of costumes for a civilization, and really take the clues from the reference we can find and sort of build an entire culture visually from that reference information.
Yeah, I'm Stephen Ekholm. I'm a senior character artist. I think that means you're over 40 in the game industry. And basically, we all sort of do the same thing. I'm the one who sculpted 7 and 9, and it's basically just grabbing a bunch of reference, looking as much episodes, and trying to find as many images of the actor as you can from all sorts of different angles, and doing some pretty precise measurements and trying to figure out where the nose is and where the eyes are. And then it's just going straight into ZBrush, is the program we use to sculpt out the likeness as best we can.
I love that you are using it. It is sculpting. It is in fact sculpting. It may not be clay. It may not be stone. It is but it's still sculpting.
Definitely.
It's an artistry. Absolutely, it's a craft.
Yeah, it's a lot like traditional sculpting actually. ZBrush is one of my favorite programs that have come down our pike. I've been doing this for about 15 years now, and ZBrush came along about in the middle of my career. And then studios started adopting it, but it is much like sculpting in clay. They sort of set it up to be more artist-friendly and less technical, less about all the vertices and meshes and all of that stuff that we have to deal with all the time, and more about just getting in there and being able to see it almost like it's in 3 dimensions. So it's really fun for an artist because it really opens a lot of doors for you.
I'm Ian Castaneda. I'm also one of the senior character artists. I guess he's right because I'm also over 40.
I'm going to divulge my age from senior under 40.
I sculpted Neelix and the Doctor, and it is true that when
No, it's okay. I'm just gonna adjust it.
When we start out doing one of these characters, that we do watch a lot of reference episodes, and pretty much we try and get the gist of what the character is, as well as what people think that character is. And sometimes those two things are not the same. So in my case, I was trying to watch episodes from Voyager that were sort of highlighting these characters, because in most of the characters, these the Doctor and Neelix would appear, maybe for a good majority of the episode, or maybe sometimes just a little bit. But in my case, I watched a lot of the more signature episodes that Neelix and the Doctor would appear in. And the interesting thing is they would change their look from like season to season, right? Like Neelix would look vastly different than his first episode that you saw him in. So getting his look down that people would think he would look like was somewhat of a challenge, but I think I did a good job in that, since most people liked the end result. So.
Hi, my name is Jing. I'm also a senior character artist on STO. I did Tuvok and Harry Kim. I've actually got some blogs out there that have been released that give a lot of behind the scenes, but hopefully you guys will get to hear even more here on the podcast.
Well, again, thank you so much. Now, let's talk about, first, let's talk about the tools that you have at your disposal. We're not talking about the character creator that players have access to. Talk to us about that. What tools do you have? You already mentioned one. How does that then get imported into the game? Where does it begin?
There's a long process that's fairly tedious, actually, where you have to take the sculpted model and essentially we call it baking it down onto a lower res geometry. So basically we'll try to sculpt out as best we can kind of the look and feel that we're looking, and we'll make our artistic evaluations of that model, like is it too big, is it too small, is it too wide here or too thin. We'll basically get it down to where this is the thing we really like. And then we'll build a smaller mesh that has less vertices, that's more conducive to a game engine, because processing in a game engine can only handle so much at one time. So you have to sort of reduce the amount, because obviously a face like that or something in ZBrush can be millions and millions of polygons. It can be quite large, and the game engine just can't push that live. So we'll take it and we'll, what we call baking it down, onto a smaller mesh, and then you just go through and tweak it until the smaller mesh looks as close to that high-res one as you possibly can.
I don't know, Brad, if you can demonstrate or show the tool that you guys have, at least for importing it into the game. I don't know if that's something you can show or.
Well, what's interesting though is the character creator that the players use in the Tailor is fundamentally very similar to what we use from the development side. We have more options. But for the most part, it's mixing and matching parts just like the players do with the character creator. The process, of course, getting it from ZBrush into the game, it's we have like an import button, and then we have to set up some links to materials and textures and slotting stuff in. It's not too exciting to look at. I don't know if we have anything to show, but it just looks like an ugly editor. It's, meant to be functional. It's much pretty.
Right.
Going on to more of the process, slightly different tactic that I used. I didn't use ZBrush for Harry Kim or Tuvok. I took our existing heads and just kind of tried to massage the low poly model and use some of our bone scaling. Again, very similar to what the players get access to, except as the developers, our scale sliders are much wider range, and I try to get it as close as I can to the actors. Here's a good work in progress. And so you can see very early on, without any customization, just using bone sliders and our existing assets on the far left, that's kind of where Tuvok started. And I'm like, okay, what key features do I need to get in there? The furrow on his brow is a very trademark feature of Tim Russ, and that had to be a new custom texture for that. So go back in and I took the base texture and started painting it, and tried to get actually high enough resolution images of him to kind of put in as a layer in Photoshop, and then start massaging it and painting it from there. And then getting the real shape of his nose and his lips and his eyes is going in and adjusting the base head model even further, and beyond what the bone scale sliders can do.
So I guess that you guys had pictures of all these people all adorned around your desks and monitors, above your bed at night.
Definitely part of the process is assembling these reference boards, and I believe each of you guys made one of these as well, to sort of distill as many different angles and looks at these characters as possible. And as Ian said, I think one of the interesting challenges is trying to create really a composite character, because you're really just creating one version of Tuvok, or one version of Neelix, and it has to be the sort of all-encompassing version of that character. As you can see here, artists gather reference from really various stages throughout the show's history, various ages. Often we're trying to create a version of the character that does look a little bit older, obviously, because he's that occurs later in the timeline, but should still be recognizable to a fan who's familiar with watching the show. So it can't look too dissimilar, perhaps slightly more aged, but and again, that sort of combines the best representations of each feature as it appears throughout the show's run.
Now, with any of the actors, were there any specific hurdles that you faced when trying to import them into Star Trek Online?
Harry Kim seemed especially challenging in a lot of ways. He doesn't have like a lot of like typically outstanding features. That sounds terrible to say. He's a handsome man, often making like a typical face. It then just kind of will tend to look generic, and then you're missing those key parts. And so it was very tricky to find those subtle nuances that make Harry Kim actually look like Harry Kim. Tim Russ has a little more exaggerated features, so it's a little bit easier to pull on aspects of him. I also had done Worf earlier, and he also had more distinct features, like some of his cheeks, they're very strong, and it's easier to pull those features that make you go, oh, that's totally Michael Dorn. Also, too, as a Klingon, you can have some ridges on the forehead, and they don't have to be necessarily exact or precise. And you're like, oh, yeah, it's a Klingon, that's Worf. So.
I was going to say, for the Doctor, he has, whenever you see him in a scene, he's always giving that sort of skeptical look, yeah, exactly. So I didn't want to exactly bake that into his face when you see him, but I wanted you to sort of see that expression in there. Like, it's there, but it's like it used to be when I sculpted it the first time. It used to be much harsher, but then I sort of I toned it back a bit, so it wasn't so overt. So I did sort of a balancing act between what I would say would be sort of his relaxed pose as opposed to his sort of grimaced, skeptical look that he often gives in the show.
Did you see his tweet about
No, I didn't see it.
He comments, I can't remember the tweet off exactly, but he was like, they really captured my something, and it's true because you did.
Called it something really funny.
Yeah,
like his constipated face or something.
Something like
that.
Cool.
And it was. It really is. When I saw the Doctor, when I've seen all of them, I mean, it's remarkable how well you've been able to capture, and it's.
Thank you.
You mentioned that you can. It's not just about trying to match cheekbone to cheekbone or eye level to eye level, but about the nuances of that actor's face, of that person's face. Mm-hmm. It's not just a photocopy type of issue, but it's the emotion that has to be captured, and that it's astounding that we're seeing this in Star Trek Online. So it's a real pleasure. So thank you very much.
That's actually a very good point. A lot of the actors, there is like a distinct personality that you can kind of see behind their face, like even at a default. And it's one thing that a lot of definitely STO's characters, even other games' characters, kind of have like this just blank expression, lifeless. And so it was taking a little bit of that expression and getting it in there.
I think one other challenge too, like with 7 and 9, and in particular I think with females, is that in video games there's often sort of a visual language, a sort of an iconic way that they portray all characters, but especially females. So whenever you bring up, like when you try to put in the features that make someone look unique, it's tough sometimes because the lighting and the way the video game represents the low poly work and the thing that you have, it's hard to add those features in that really make them who they are, because it just doesn't react as well with people, right? They say, oh, she looks older because she has eyelids, or you know what I mean, because we're used to seeing them very blank and very featureless. So there's a sort of balance you have to find in the middle, and I find that extraordinarily challenging, especially with the females.
Game engines are definitely harsher with the lighting.
Yeah.
On male characters, it kind of goes over your head a little bit because males tend to be a little more rugged, rough around the edges. But then when you are trying to make a pretty character, it is very, very challenging because the wrong lighting, and it can start showing off the low polys and cause an unattractive look.
And just like lines along the side of a nose, which everybody has, right? The smile lines that everybody has are quite beautiful. But in a video game, it'll make a female look older instantly.
Right.
You know, so you got to just be really careful with how much of that information you're putting in there.
Yeah, something Stephen and I talked about too. It's compensating for lighting too in a film or television setting. You can light certain actors or actresses in a different way to complement their appearance and so on. But we don't really have that luxury. And so some of the features needed to be softened for 7 for that purpose, because everybody's operating in, these characters are operating in any number of different ranges of lighting situations, not all flattering, so that's just something that has to be taken into consideration too.
I read in the blog that you guys pretty much all worked on her together as far as double checking, does this look right, does this look right, and then going
For
back
sure,
and
yeah.
fixing
Yeah.
it.
We do that with pretty much everything we do. We all sit in the same office and we bounce stuff off each other every day, all the time.
It's especially true too with these celebrities. It's really useful, and I mentioned this in the blog as well, to get fresh eyes on it, because you are sitting there staring at, you know, hour after hour, going down to pixel level, and sometimes it's hard to gauge, you know, what key features like go into it to really sell the idea of the true actor and getting new eyes on. So every one of these characters went through a lot of back and forth, showing it to the fellow artists, handing it to Brad. Brad would do markups and send it back, and then we do revisions on it. And then too, a lot of it's just asking, you know, does it feel like it's missing something? Is there a key feature that is not coming across, or something that looks off to you? And then you can often get like slightly different things from different people, but then when you put all those together, then hopefully at the end we end up with characters that are instantly recognizable.
And not only artists, designers, and everyone, you know, pretty much on the team looks at them too.
So we see some of what Joe just described, sort of illustrated here. This is just sort of one of a number of rough passes. It shows some of the progression, right, from the early mock-ups that Joe described, sort of using assets that exist, trying to get close with something we have, and then determining how and where we want to apply custom work, whether that's a unique hairstyle or just paying attention to those certain features. And you're really kind of walking a fine line in some circumstances, because you, again, talking about the format of games, you almost want to exaggerate certain features. You don't quite want to caricaturize them, but you do want to call attention to certain features, you know, and make them a little bit more prominent, just a little bit, than they would be in real life, because you're seeing the characters in general at such a small scale, and you just don't have all of that fidelity that you do with photographing a human face. So this just illustrates some of that. We're trying to focus on certain features and make them more prominent and match the reference.
Slightly funny thing with Harry Kim too is we of course want something that looks like him from Voyager, and that way designers can come up with reasons to, like, you know, it's Star Trek, so we've got time travel as an option, we've got dream sequences, we've got all mind meld with Tuvok, all kinds of reasons to go back in time. That way you get to see your character as you remember him and love him. But then too, we knew that we wanted him in our Star Trek present day, which is much older, and actually Garrett Wang, or Wang, I'm not sure how. All right, he actually looks really great for his age. He is very handsome man, very fit, and so in the video game, because the camera is typically so far away and it's lower resolution, we've got to exaggerate some of that aging process so that you can tell, oh, this is the original young Harry Kim Voyager version, and then this is him more matured and older. And so then you exaggerate some of like the features that would make somebody look older. But Harry Kim actually looks better than and younger than the old version that's in our game.
That's really true, because like as far as the distance when you see these characters, because most of the time when you walk up to a character in our game, they're like 20, 50 feet away. So we want the effect that when you see them, you're like, you know, if even at that far distance, you can tell just from the features that you can see that it's, you know, that particular character.
Now with with Garrett Wong, since he, out of the 5 of them, actually came to the office. Did you get a chance to interact with him about this?
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
It is.
Good segue to this image.
That's sweet. Luckily, I was working late, and Maria, our producer, came by, and she's like, "So he's finishing up some recording, and he's gonna walk around. You want to meet him?" I'm like, "Yeah." So I met him, and I'm like, "Yeah, I made you."
And you have all his pictures all over, and it's like, I think I may want to leave.
Stalker-esque.
It was great. We looked at him in one of the environment guys' office, and while they were looking at the bridge of Voyager, and we changed costume into Harry Kim and had him do some dance emotes in the game, and then
So that's what sparked the famous
Garrett
dance
started
off.
doing the running
Yeah.
man dance.
Gotcha.
Side by side with it, just quite funny. He's a really awesome guy too. Super funny, down to earth. And, he seemed to love all the stuff that we were doing. He was really behind it. It's really cool to have like somebody who was like such a big part of the whole like universe and has so many fans himself, and then he comes in and he's helping continue this for more fans and bringing the story to life, and he's obviously very happy with where it's going, so that's cool.
Awesome, absolutely. What about aliens? You know, what challenges? I know, aliens. You know, what challenges do you face when, you know, creating aliens that are not just, you know, from IP that we've seen, but even aliens that we haven't seen? You know, how do you create a civilization of NPCs when you've only seen a few of them on screen?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Again, it begins with reference, but I think one of the interesting opportunities with some of these alien species is that we can sort of take what was in the spirit of the prosthetic show, but really take that to the next level. I mean, you've got limitations with prosthetics applied to a human face, which we try to exaggerate and sort of take just barely to the next level. Again, keeping with the inspiration of that original makeup, but now in the virtual world, we can circumvent any of the limitations of human anatomy.
So with this, you were able to exaggerate and make even more alien the features.
Right, we don't have to conform to an actual human skull underneath it. But this also is a very good example of what Stephen was describing as one of our processes. So this is a sculpt from ZBrush. So it's almost like digitally sculpting with clay, and it's like millions of polys. And I took our base human head, modified it to give it the kind of neck flares, and then brought it into ZBrush and subdivided it, sculpted it, and then put like a really quick just base texture to get some of the spots in there, which then can also be baked down onto the low poly, and then I can unwrap that, bring it into Photoshop, and I've got a nice starting point to like really go in and refine the texture work.
And now, how does the game create these civilizations? How does it, you know, what do you have to do so that, you know, Vaadwars look different, you know, from one to the next?
Mm-hmm.
That's where, oh sorry, do you want to talk about that?
No, go ahead.
That's where we leverage a lot of our tools with the bone scaling. We have a bunch of facial bones, brows. We can raise or lower the brow. We can widen them. The nose, we have a ton of different options. Again, raising, lowering, widening nostrils. You can reposition the nostrils to an extent. Lips, mouth, and all of this, you can kind of move this around to get, if you really need to, distinction between the different faces. For the most part, the game camera is pretty far away, so we use bigger visual cues to differentiate them, which is a lot of silhouette, shape, color, and then accessories. And so, as you can see in the critter group here, we try to get that language across, and that way you can, hopefully when you're playing the game, readily determine who's a danger or who's just throwaway fodder. Hopefully that answered your question.
Also, the design also extends to like the like vehicles and buildings and other non-character things that you would think of, you know. And so that shape language and the colors and stuff extend to those things as well.
In most cases, yeah, we coordinate with the environment team and with the guys who are building ships, and you know, and of course Brad coordinates all of that.
Yeah.
Helps us with that to make sure everything is sort of a common vision, and that they sort of match each other, so that when you see one, you know that it came from these guys, or that it's from this race, or you know that language is there, so it just feels like they're real and that they're a part of a bigger picture. You know.
Brad, do you want to talk about like your idea for what these guys were, like as far as the trench warfare and stuff as inspiration?
Yeah, absolutely. So the design for any sort of species or any new group of enemies obviously starts with a bit of reference and research gathered, but really it derives from a sort of a mission statement or a theme that should visually communicate what the species or race is all about. And so with the Vaudoir specifically, we had a number of sort of thematic motivators. One of them was the idea of this species as sort of a conquering blitzkrieg warfare using, dominant force that just steamrolls through the galaxy in their history, appearing without warning, sort of crushing resistance. And obviously there are some parallels there, in our own current consciousness with sort of German military in World War II. And there's some, more than a little reference and inspiration taken from those sorts of uniforms, uniforms that should convey a sort of feel of intimidation. And you can see that in sort of the commanding officers' coats and the use of leather, these sort of stormtrooper, shock trooper helmets. Another thing that we utilized when designing this group was that you would face them in an environment on a ground zone, again, that felt a little bit like a throwback, trench warfare and so on. And in the design of the Vaudoir weapons too, we wanted a look and feel that was a bit retro. And again, we sort of took inspiration from World War II actual weapons, because the storyline behind the Vaudoir is that they've been in suspended animation for 1,000 years. When they wake up, their technology, their uniforms, their way of warfare should really communicate that. And even though they might be able to augment some of their technology or power, they're still rooted in that sort of retro feel. At the same time, their ships and their technology don't just feel retro, but also a little bit brutalist. They're not designed for sleekness, for appearances. They look very functional, and they look very brutal and powerful. So rather than sort of sleek and very nimble, they look just brutal and to the point. So they're built for sort of one purpose, which is just to completely crush their foe.
Can you go back to the roster as well?
What's that?
Can you go back to the roster one more time?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
An interesting thing to me as a character artist on Star Trek, typically whenever we want to show higher rank in a lot of our critter groups, we often put on more and more armor as they become like, lieutenant to lieutenant commander to captain. And then the captain's like the most ridiculously outfitted, got the biggest, heaviest space armor and stuff like that. But one of the things that we did completely opposite with this group is, again, going towards that kind of trench warfare type thing, World War II inspiration. It's more the ground troops and the lower levels that are like lugging around all the heavy gear, while your officers are more the stalwart, long coat, looking very official. Of course, still with our gameplay, with the camera pretty far away when you're running around the zone, we still have to have like those officers really stand out. So they're definitely scaled up and sized up a bit bigger. But it was kind of a fun way to play with our typical way of giving visual language to the different ranks.
Actually, it's a really good point on the armor too. With our new ground adventure zone, I was interested in going a different direction when envisioning their gear. Traditionally, we have put a lot of emphasis on a lot of armor, And I kind of wanted to get away from that because traditionally in the shows and the films, Star Trek is about uniforms, not about big chunky metal sci-fi armor. And so this was an opportunity to create a few new groups that were defined by something that was more akin to a uniform and less to some kind of bulky metallic armor.
When we were talking with Hector Ortiz regarding ship design, you commented on this a little bit. He mentioned about it feeling. He pulled inspiration from the Cold War, things of that that kind of style, and particularly with the weapons, you can see that that similarity between the ships and now their weapons here, and even in their outfit. The brown, the color schemes, the textures, and so it's amazing to see this. These themes and these pieces of character, not just in their faces, but in their outfits and in their weapons, and of course in their ships.
Sure.
Which I'm sure is not easy.
Great. Well, I'm glad that comes across. We definitely spent a lot of time trying to create that unified, cohesive feel, that there is a reason, at least a visual reason, that all these things sort of coexist in the same space for each species.
I think too, like in outfits like this, it's nice because there's we get to exercise a little creativity, and that just makes it fun and more passionate for an artist. Oftentimes you're tasked to make this outfit from the show, and you're doing your damnedest to make that as close to the show as you can, right? Because that's the IP, and that's what you're trying to do is make it pretty much like that. But then when you get to explore a little bit, like Joe and Brad did with this, it's really quite beautiful. It's interesting to see how different and fun you can get with it, I guess.
At the same time, if you look at even the reference, we are definitely taking our cues from the official show.
No doubt.
You can see that they predominantly wear the brown. It has a very, like SS German officer look to it, just in brown. Like even the high boots and the belt in the midsection. But we definitely tried to retain a lot of the key features, like the X strap on the chest, the little pins on the collar, retaining a lot of that look, and then being able to expand it out into our full roster of ranks and stuff. Because obviously in the show, a lot of times the ranks aren't necessarily as pertinent per character. You don't need to instantly recognize, and I mean the show's working with budget as well, so often they're like, okay, this is our alien species we're dealing with this episode, and they most likely made one costume and made a bunch of them, and then the only way you differentiate the rank is by a little pin or something. Right. But for a game we need heavier-handed visual language to get that across. But as Steven said, it was definitely fun to be able to take what's there in the show and expand it and blow it out.
So, gentlemen, with the amount of work that went into Delta Rising, I mean, of course, one of the most exciting things, of course, is having the characters transported into Star Trek Online. But for each of you, what would you say is your proudest achievement with Delta Rising? Being that it's coming out next week.
I can't tell you.
There's a lot of stuff for me that I really like. I wouldn't be able to pinpoint it, but I do like the fact that I did Neelix and the Doctor. And a lot of people seem to have helped me do that, and I think it's one of the highlights for me anyway, for working on Delta Rising.
Yeah, you really knocked that out of the park.
Okay.
It's awesome.
Yeah, definitely working on the celebrities is a big win. I mean, it's super exciting. Every Star Trek fan, recognizes that sort of thing. Even people who just have passing knowledge or interest of Star Trek can at least latch onto that. So, I mean, those are definitely the sort of things that I will post on my Facebook wall, and any family and friend is like, wow, that's so cool.
That's true.
Some of the other stuff, though very cool to work on, becomes a little more obscure, and maybe I'm not getting as much feedback. So the celebrities are very cool.
Celebrities are more like, oh, if I show this to my wife, she'll go, oh, I know who that is. But if I showed them some armor thing I did, a couple months ago, my wife would be like, "Oh, that's nice." So.
Now, let me ask you this because, I'm a musician, and so there is that level of creativity, and it sometimes can be difficult for a craftsman to get into a working position, where, you can pay the bills, right?
Yeah.
So I'd like to just take a moment maybe to give a little bit of a backstory, or if you have any advice for starving artists that are trying to, break into a career of visual arts, if there's anything that you might want to say to them.
Sure. I think the thing about being an artist, like making environments or making characters or anything like that, is that oftentimes what's most important is what you have in your portfolio, how good the work is, whether it's convincing. And because when an art director looks through that portfolio, he's rifling through quite a few portfolios, and he wants to find the one that catches his eye the quickest. So having quality in your work is probably the most important thing, is to really pay attention to details and just keep trying. It's iteration, right? That's how you get better at anything, just like being a musician. You keep playing the song until you've got the riff down. You just keep doing it, and then it becomes second nature to you. So if you're learning to do it, you just keep doing it until you get it right, and then use your friends and your peers to double check whether that's right or not.
I would just add to that too, that especially for a young artist who's starting out, I would say there could be a temptation to make something that you think that other people want to see, or make something that you think is going to fit in with the mainstream or what's interesting now. My advice would be to really find something that you're passionate about and let your own style come through. I think that's something that will help you stand out, and ultimately will find you a better fit in the end. So really embrace what you love to do.
Adding to that, one more thing. If you are interested in getting into video game art, make sure that your portfolio includes examples of actually video game ready art. ZBrush is a fantastic program, and it's a lot of fun to use, and there are a lot of artists out there that do use it, but without a basic understanding of what it takes to actually get it working in a game, that can really hurt your chances of getting a job.
Yeah, there are game engines out there you can actually download for free, and if you can get your art in there and show that off, that's a huge plus, because it shows you can create something both presumably high poly, but then you can also put it into a low poly game engine and it still looks good, and that's huge.
That's a fantastic point. I mean, there's been numerous cases in the past where, when evaluating potential candidates, we've definitely given bonus points or extra consideration to somebody who has implemented their character, their art, their environment piece, or what have you, and showed us renders from within the engine environment. So that's a great piece of advice too.
And can I say something about style too? Is that I remember as a young artist, people would say, "Oh, show your style and show your style." And I'd say, "Well, I don't know what I want to make my style. I don't know what I want it to be. How can I find that?" And over the years, I found that, and I don't think it takes years to get here, mind you, but I think that style comes from what you enjoy, what you like to see. It's not something that you think about and decide, this is going to be my style. It comes from the things you like to look at, and then you trying to mimic it. It's like the Beatles said this too, right? The Beatles were like trying to mimic rock and roll and old blues music, but because they had a particular take on it, it sounded like the Beatles, and that became their style. So style comes to you just from working at it. I'm pretty convinced of this.
Absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so very much for spending your afternoon here with us on Priority One Podcast and inviting us to the studio and talking about art. I mean, it's some beautiful things that we've been seeing for Delta Rising. And not just from the reveal in Star Trek Las Vegas, but things that have hit Tribble, and of course now being able to discuss and get a better understanding of what it takes to transport a character into Star Trek Online. So thank you very much, and we appreciate your talents and your art.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fun.